Welcome to Flourishing Unfiltered, the podcast for high achievers who seek a professional life that feels as good as it looks.
We talk about the unseen journey of struggles on the path to success that people rarely talk about.
I'm Kieran Smith, positive psychology and leadership coach and consultant.
And I'm Dr. Michael Neuhaus, positive psychology and self-leadership speaker and consultant.
Before we begin today, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we're recording. We pay our deepest respects to their elders past, present and emerging.
As we share our stories today, we honour the rich tradition of storytelling that has been passed down through generations.
Today's episode is brought to you by the Future of Flourishing, a futures thinking media, training and venture lab dedicated to bridging the gap between scientific knowledge and practical application in the field of human flourishing.
The Future of Flourishing is committed to creating a comprehensive ecosystem of communication and innovation platforms. Find out more about the Future of Flourishing at futureofflourishing.com.
If you enjoy our podcast, please leave us a review. It would mean the world to us.
And today it gives me great pleasure to introduce Corey Keyes as a guest to our show. Corey Keyes is Professor Emeritus of Sociology at Emory University, where he held the Winship Distinguished Research Professorship. He was a member of the prestigious International MacArthur Foundation Research Network on successful midlife development and aging. He has participated in several National Academies of Science initiatives, the Future of Human Healthspan, and improving national statistics to measure recovery from mental illness. Corey organized and co-hosted the first Summit of Positive Psychology held in 1999 at the Gallup Organization. His research introduced the concepts of social well-being, flourishing, the two continua model of mental health and illness, and his work is being used to prevent mental illness via the promotion of positive, flourishing mental health. And Corey's most recent book is titled Languishing, in which he describes his own personal and scientific journey to create a scientific body of research to address two serious problems in himself and the world. One that wasn't being addressed at all, languishing, in order to deal with another problem that was being addressed, mental illness, but continues to this day with little progress. And I can personally say that his book is absolutely amazing. I've loved every single bit of it. And as you would probably know by now as well, Corey's work has tremendously influenced our own and is probably the biggest reason why Karen and I are even here doing this show together. So, Corey, it is such a pleasure to welcome you on this show. Thank you so very much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, Corey, you know what this show is about. What I would love to know is what actually inspired you to start on this incredible academic journey and how you got into flourishing and languishing and all the rest of it.
Well, it begins around the age of 12, believe it or not. And that's when I was transplanted into a home where I felt safe and loved, where my grandparents adopted me and my sister. They were retired, and they took on a lot when they said they were going to adopt us. But as I say in my book, in the credits, they inspired the idea of flourishing because when they adopted us, they planted that seed. And for the first time in my childhood, I understood that things could be a lot more beautiful than what I had experienced up to that point. And so I wanted to honor. You honored the land in which you were doing this podcast. I've always wanted to honor those who gave me something that I could never do for myself, which was my grandparents. And so I was either going to become a priest. I was very deeply involved in Catholicism. I loved being an altar boy. I couldn't wait to get to church on Sunday and help Father Henry. Or I was going to become a professor. And I chose the path that gave me a version of the priesthood, but it also gave me the opportunity to do what I found out that I loved the most, to teach and to do research. So I was very lucky. I was very lucky to be pulled out. Some very horrible circumstances that I talk about. It wasn't just the seeds of flourishing. I was also trying to create something beautiful out of a very, very traumatic beginning in life it's traveled with me throughout my adulthood, that trauma, and I'm still working on it today and in therapy every week to deal with something that will always be with me and I'll have to work on. So.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Corey. And, I appreciate your openness about this so much. And I know that recently, you were on Scott Barry Kaufman's podcast, and that was an amazing chat as well. Really appreciated that. When you say, that's where you started out and you either were going to become a priest or you were going to become a professor. But what about the field of, languishing and flourishing? Was that clear to you right from the start? What inspired you to get into that? I mean, that didn't even exist back then.
No, I can't trace it to any one event. But strangely enough, and this I don't write about because I think it would be hard to explain to people. There was a movie that changed my life, and it was by David Attenborough, and it was about Mahatma Gandhi. And I have watched that movie many, many times, but that movie inspired me then to read everything I could about Gandhi. Because when I watched that movie, I saw a person who gave me what I call the middle way. Given what I had grown up in, to me, either you fought back, right? You used aggression and violence to overcome violence and aggression, or you were passive and you accepted it. It was either or. And I think a lot of young people grow up feeling that. And when I saw nonviolence, I saw a person who could hold on to his ethics and morality and yet fight injustice and do it in a way that was constructive and positive and without doing any physical harm. The power of your conscience leading to purity of action is what inspired me to go, I think, to study things that were positive. And when I got to graduate school, I wanted to study health. And I naively thought, people were studying it in the constructive, positive way, not merely as the absence. And so I went down the rabbit hole of trying to find measures of health, particularly mental health, as something positive, and there was nothing there. And I thought to myself, this has to be changed. We can't live a life where mental health is invisible. It's an empty category or it's invisible. And so I had my cause, my purpose, and I wanted to put something out there that was that people weren't taking seriously. So of all things, I've never told that story because the more I read about Gandhi, the more I realized that the people who fight injustice through peace leave a legacy that's very positive, even though they're fighting something that's usually oppressive and aggressive.
Wow, Corey, this is very insightful start to our conversation here. And if I was to go maybe off script for just a moment here, because it's maybe a bit of personal interest, but if we were to do just like a rapid fire, who would be 3 major influences to your work? I'm hearing Gandhi here, so I'm wondering if that's one of them. But who would be 3 major influences in the work that you've undertaken?
Well, under the rubric of Gandhi, I would put King, Martin Luther King, and Abraham Musti, who was a labor activist who used it to fight injustice here in the U.S., but King to fight racial injustice and inequality, and Gandhi to do the same thing, and colonialism. Masterful. And so that's the first. You can fight injustice through very, very loving and peaceful means, because the conscience is a powerful thing. And then when I learned the story of the Buddha, how Siddhartha became the Buddha, I was like, oh my God, here's a person who was born into extreme luxury and advantage. And he I resonated with that story, whether it's real or not. But I was shocked by how much suffering there was in the world and how much I had experienced by the age of 12. And yet, what shocked me the most is I didn't hate. It didn't create hate in me. It created a sense of empathy and love. And I was like, oh my God. So when you see the way he transformed his idea of suffering into something that you could find equanimity, peace, and love in this world. Because we're all, the way the Buddhists say, the glass is already broken, so don't cling to it, even though, right? So the people like that, and then my grandmother and grandfather, who were working class people who lived in a mobile home, but it was the most beautiful place. They took such great pride in it. And nobody who went by that house didn't stop to marvel at all the flowers and how beautiful outside it looked, and how they didn't realize how beautiful it was inside. And so it wasn't what you're living in, it's how you live that they taught me. So those three amazing people. And I would put my grandparents in the same damn class as the Buddha and King and Gandhi.
I had wondered too.
We're all ordinary people. Ordinary people can do extraordinary things.
Yeah, I think that's a lovely message too for our listeners to hear as well. And I know that was maybe a random question that I just sort of thrown in the mix here for you, Corey, and I hope you don't mind. But I feel as though our listeners would be deeply intrigued to understand a little bit more around those key influences in your life and the work that you've done. And on the topic of your work, as Micah sort of explained, this whole notion of thinking about psychology in a different way was maybe sort of thought of a little bit, but you've really taken it to quite an extreme and really given us, for a whole lot of people in this industry, a really different perspective as to how we view mental health and illness. I'm curious, as you're venturing through that, and maybe even still to this day, was there a time when you sort of felt as though you were a bit lonely in that space, like you were sort of up against it and you were the only one sort of doing the work? And can you maybe talk us through if there was a time when you felt that and sort of how it made you feel or how it impacted the way you went about your work?
Yeah. Well, yes, indeed, it was a very lonely project that I took on. And not only was it lonely, what I learned was that we're born into a world where others before us have defined what's important and gets resources and attention. By the same token, what's unimportant and should remain invisible. And when I started studying health as more than the absence, I'm telling you, I started to get a bunch of pushback from colleagues in sociology saying that's unimportant. Why are you focusing on that? There's inequality and problems in the world. Why are you focusing on flourishing and happiness? And they said, I got all kinds of feedback that I was unearthing something that they wanted to say invisible and unimportant. And interestingly enough, I've been called stubborn many times because I do not let others like that define for me what I think is important.
It's called grit, right?
Well, grit, it's, yeah. So but they, in academia, that was a bad word, to be labeled stubborn. And I can't figure out why the hell not. In this world, we need to be dogged and stubborn about what we care about, and especially when things like that are invisible. because the whole project was about taking something that's invisible, seen, and making it visible. And I'm telling you, for the first 10 years, between 2002, when I published the very first paper on this, until 2012, nobody else even used the word flourishing scientifically. It's true that, like, for instance, Carol Riff used the word, but she wasn't measuring it. She was talking about psychological well-being. And to me, flourishing was the stand-in word for mental health. And so, to me, mental health was far more than psychological well-being. And so then the loneliness shifted to a sense where when other people and some very senior people started writing about it as if nobody had done anything before them. And the world, even you're headquartered in Australia, right? They had people come down to Australia and teach them about flourishing. And I was like, well, oh my God, I'm invisible now. Again. And I was like, so again, what I did was get stubborn and say, well, I'm not going to change my course. I'm going to continue to do the research that I believe in. I have a plan and a story to tell. But I must say, it remains a pretty damn lonely thing to just quietly go about doing your work without promoting things and without foundations coming along without a ton of money and saying, well, I want to start a new field. Will you actually take my money and, control people and who gets in and who gets out and who gets attention, who doesn't get attention? And that's the way positive psychology started. And I wanted nothing to do with it. The way I describe it is I'm a wild Mustang horse. You don't come along and put a saddle on me. I will buck and fight and tell you to get the hell off. If you want to run with me together and take a journey and share and talk and help each other, I'll run with you. But I'm free and you do not control what I do. And so I said goodbye to it very early. It was like, no, I'm going to do what I need to do. And thank God the MacArthur Foundation gives you money and says, I'm giving money to the best minds in the world. I will let you determine what gets measured and how it gets measured and so forth. And that's the data. If without that data set, I wouldn't have been able to even do this work.
Incredible. And Corey, I don't know how easy it is for you to answer that question, but why that pushback? Why is it that you've been on this lonely journey? Why did you first get ignored and then, other people start talking about it as if it's never been mentioned before? And
I have a hunch that people see the world in zero-sum terms. That if you come along with something new and different, they believe you're invalidating and saying what they're doing is unimportant. And my two continuum model does not argue that at all. It simply says that those of you who've been focusing on mental illness, guess what? You might be missing something over here. And by the way, even with mental illness, people have some level of well-being that's also helping or complicating their mental illness. And that's not the way they saw it. They saw me, I think, as perhaps taking resources and attention. I can't tell you how many times when in the public health realm, people were threatened by the fact, well, that means you're going to get more resources than people who really need it, like the mentally ill, are going to get less. And I was like, guess what? I'm one of those too. I have met, it's not a zero-sum world. And sadly, I think academics fall for that too. That if you introduce something new, you're invalidating something that's been around and old. I'm not at all about that.
Yeah, 100%. And that's one of the reasons also I left academia, because that whole competitiveness, the working against each other rather than together with one another and so forth, I can relate to that a little bit. That sounds so exhausting, taxing. It sounds unfair. It sounds lonely. What did you do to navigate? How come you're still sitting here today? How do you get through all of this? If our listeners, if anyone, can relate, what's the secret?
Well, I talk about this in the book, but people would look at me and say I'm a story of resilience, and I have come to loathe that word. And I'll tell you why. It's not to say that research area is unimportant, but I have rarely read resilience stories that would tell my whole story, all of the suffering and problems I went through to get here. The near suicide attempt that I write about in the book, I mean, this close. And if my wife hadn't come home early that night and said 4 words that stopped me dead in my tracks, she said, "But I need you." Nobody, right? The resilience research doesn't look at all of those problems. Do they look at the fact that, and I'll be very open, like many people, I fell prey to alcoholism, and I've been in recovery. They wouldn't. I don't hear lots of people talking about it, and how hard that is, and how much I've used it as grist for growth and grist for creating beauty. No. So they don't tell the stories of all the suffering when they look at us and say, "Wow, look at, you're resilient." And I'm like, that's the shiny, beautiful thing you want to talk about. Let's talk about all of the stuff that had to come before that. There's more. I mean, I'm like so honest about it, because I mean, I'm not alone. I am not alone in all of that. And the problem is that you start your journey thinking you're the only one, and that you're patently crazy and broken and faulty. And then you start to realize others have gone through that and walked through the garden wall, and they're there to help you. That's the beauty of Alcoholics Anonymous. You walk into the room broken, and you hear stories of hope, of people like you who have gone just through the same things, and you want what they have. So, yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. To me, it's the story of I guess they call it what's the bird where that you crash and you die and you're reborn?
Isn't it the phoenix?
Phoenix.
The phoenix story. It's, to me, my life is about the phoenix story. The stuff that I had to deal with, I had to work through it, and it had to die in order for something new to be reborn.
That is so powerful. And I get what you're saying, what you said before about that it didn't sit right with you that people called you resilient, because, it's the nice and shiny story people want to focus on, when really that takes the attention away from perhaps what's wrong around you, right? Which is obviously something that you're passionate about. Yeah.
The struggle.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously I know, obviously from having read your book, that your wife played a significant role. What were some other factors? I mean, we're talking about loneliness a lot, and now we're starting to talk about connecting with others, feeling understood, perhaps validated, supported, talking about Alcoholics Anonymous. What else helped you navigate this lonely path?
Well, there's that wall behind me is the wall of that I talk about, of people and pets and things that became sort of my tribe and my family, right? So I had to find those, and they're also what Joseph Campbell would call my earth angels. They were there. There's the professors that really became like family, and there's so many people on that wall that saw something in me before I saw it and shined it back. That when you get that close to ending your life before you've used it up, you start to realize that all that they invested in you and gave you, you would be throwing back into their face and not honoring the gifts they gave you. So, when I'm in that darkest place, I remember, even now that many of them have passed on, that they still live in me.
And that is such a beautiful thing to share with us too, Corey. And for those people that are wondering what's on the wall, there's a beautiful set of different photo frames there, which Corey's describing to us. Corey, I'm wondering if, if you were to reflect on, you've had an incredible journey. If we were to try and summarize maybe 3 big life lessons that you've learnt that have helped guide you from, where you started off to where we are now, what would those 3 lessons be?
Well, the first one was I had to learn early on to say no. I talk about in my book a professor of English after my freshman year who took me aside because I could not get any higher grade than a D+ in English, despite having tutors and rewriting essays. And I came from a very small school from northern Wisconsin where there were 53 of us that graduated and only 3 of us went on to college. And I realized early on that what I was taught at that high school was not even close to what was necessary to do well in college, because I think the presumption was that none of us were really going to leave my little town in Three Lakes. So that professor took me aside thinking he was helping me. He said, "Corey, I don't think you belong here." And I said, I didn't say this to him, but I went home that summer and I decided, no, he is wrong. And that message is, I am not going to accept that. And throughout my life, I've had to say no to things that people do to me and say to me that I could have easily internalized and believed. And I said, no, you're wrong. You don't know the first thing of who I am, where I'm from, what I've done. And frankly, even if you did, I'm the gatekeeper here, and I do not let you in, especially the negative stuff. And I think we all need to learn to say no. And it's not just the negative messages, it's the things that don't feed our soul and our spirit. This happens at our workplace all the time. We say yes to everything, and we should be saying no sometimes and saying no. So the beauty of no
I would say it's a big one. I think a lot of people struggle.
Yeah. Setting boundaries.
No. Yeah. The second one is that I learned that I had to go out and find the things mostly that I needed. They weren't going to come and find me. I mean, all the good things that we want in our life, we somehow think they're just going to happen to us. Yeah. If they don't happen, somehow the world is an unjust, unkind place. And that might be true. But most of the time, people in the world are indifferent, and I'll take that. So if I wanted something, I was going to have to go out and get it. And that included love and some people who were like parents to me. and I was like, they're all over the place, but we don't, sort of let them in. I found them as an undergraduate, my professors. I found it in graduate school with Carol Riff and my other professor. I found it in, right? So I've collected up this synthetic family because I had to go find it. I didn't have one. So my message is, as a sociologist, I understand the world needs to change, but I'm not going to wait for it to change to give me what I need. I'm going to go out and find it and create it.
And the world will change when we all change.
Yeah. And then to me, the third lesson is that there are so many beautiful doors that are open, but we don't walk through them. And sometimes even the door doesn't have to be open. You just have to say, yes, I deserve the same thing that everyone else has. So I've had to say, that door might be closed, but there's a doorknob on it, and damn it to hell, I'm opening it because I deserve that too. I think we're our worst enemies. I know I am, and if I talk to you sometimes the way I talk to myself, so I've learned to say that I'm as good and I deserve the same damn things, if not better, because I think you deserve better. And so I'm going to walk through every door that looks good.
Beautiful. Thank you, Corey. These are three very insightful lessons, which I think our listeners will probably all deeply resonate with, particularly those of which are early on in their ventures. I think each of these will sort of carry, have some weight and grounding in the work that they're doing. So highly insightful. I'm even looking at them going, maybe I should think about that a little bit more.
Absolutely. And there's so much self-empowerment in what you're saying and talking about. Can I ask a quick follow-up question? Because when you started mentioning that door and that people hesitate to go through these doors, even though they're wide open perhaps or right in front of you, the first thought I had was, well, people don't like to be outside their comfort zones, right? It's scary to walk towards something new. And I guess research shows this too, right? That sometimes we actually prefer certainty, even if it means it's let's say an unhappy reality, over uncertainty, even though it might promise us a brighter future, right? So I'm straight away thinking, well, is it fear? You said, they might feel as though they're not deserving. Do you think there are other reasons, or why do people not walk through these doors?
Well, I think for many of us, and certainly it was true of me, I got all kinds of messages from the first 12 years of my life and then beyond that I didn't belong. I wasn't wanted here. And so I didn't deserve, I don't deserve whatever good may come. And that's true. And I think also there is this fear, as you said, but the third is, and there's sociological research on this too, showing that children of lower socioeconomic status are taught to wait for permission. They're not taught to speak up for themselves and assert themselves. They're taught a form of conformity and wait. You should wait to do anything until you're given permission. And that was something my wife reminded me of. She saw that in me, and I fought that. And I don't wait for permission anymore because I was the one holding me back when I thought other people were. I think the world needs to stop waiting for permission to do well, and when people do the opposite and say you're not wanted here, my sense is that's when you get back to my first lesson. Is you say no. Oh, you're wrong. We're all here on this planet. We're all one way or another. We're gonna do with what. I mean, you may not want me here, but I'm here. And so I'm not going away. So I think it's permission that gets in people's way, and waiting for permission.
Interesting. And Corey, when you say those words, what I think of straight away is that whole continuum from languishing to flourishing, right? Because for me, and as you also have described many times before, flourishing is also very much about this, having this sense of being deeply alive. And alive meaning feeling empowered and, being authentic and following your own path and, and not being held back by, I guess, also autopilot or habits or the system perhaps. I don't know, can you speak a little bit to that? Do you think that people maybe have this chronic level of languishing, or is it that autopilot that gets in our way? Perhaps what can we do to remain more agile? What are your thoughts on that, or do you even see a parallel?
Well, no, I think one of the many problems that comes along with languishing, and I've felt this myself, is this sense that somehow you're starting to live life like you're a ghost. You're invisible. There's something about feeling like you're languishing where you don't feel quite alive. In fact, just the opposite. People use the word, I feel like I'm dying inside. And recently, I've been thinking about writing an essay where it begins, there's this belief that when we do die, our soul and our spirit escapes the physical body and goes off into the universe. It leaves us. I think, and I felt this myself, when I'm languishing, I feel like my spirit and my soul is kind of leaving me. And I feel like a shell. I feel really like a shell. And I'm like, there's something almost paralyzing when your spirit leaves you. It's not supposed to leave you until our physical body is done with us.
Yeah.
Right? Throughout our life, we're accumulating our soul and our spirit, and we give that and get that from other people. And then the most beautiful thing that we have escapes the physical body in the confines of, and it goes off into this universe, and I hope it continues doing beautiful things. But to think about that while you're alive, that you start feeling dead and your soul and your spirit leaves you.
That is such an interesting notion, yeah.
No, it's this sense of invisibility, living like a ghost, feeling empty, and like somehow your spirit is gone. It's missing. Yeah. It's gone lost. Can you imagine? It's like, it's not where I wish it, like the iPhone, it had a find my iPhone app. I wish our spirit and our soul has find my soul and spirit. Where did it go?
Oh gosh, you're so true. I love that idea. But, I can relate to that whole idea of, that maybe after death we feel as though our soul is liberated and it feels expansive. For me, languishing, I can relate to what you're saying, that feels as though my soul is almost leaving me, but I feel like it's almost the opposite, that it's being sucked into a black hole. Because it doesn't feel expansive. It feels like it's shrinking, reducing, disappearing that way. And I just had that thought, what if this life on earth is your opportunity to liberate your soul and become expansive and express yourself in all your facets,
Yeah. Oh, I like that because, it's true. I think it's true. What happens is that when we are genuinely ourselves and we can flourish, I think our soul and spirit comes alive and it expands. And that's when we live enough of that life here on earth, I too truly believe that when we do die, something good, it has to escape it. But when we languish too much in this life, it's as if, philosophers like Nietzsche talked about this eternal return. You have to keep coming back until you liberate your soul when you're alive. And that's the way I think about flourishing. To be really mentally healthy, your soul is being nourished, it's growing, it's becoming expansive. Because people, when they're flourishing, can't keep it to themselves. It's like you become contagious.
Yeah.
To be around people who are flourishing is like, it's hard to languish. It's like, whoa, man, you are glowing. You are alive, man. You know, so that's a beautiful way to put it, because people have talked about in cultures of the past talked about soul death, that shamans tried to bring souls back to life while their people were alive. That soul death was usually the reason lots of people were not doing well.
Look, and Corey, to be honest, this was actually almost segues beautifully into the last question that I had. I'm not too sure Michael might have another one for you. But it was really thinking, if there was like one golden bit of advice that you could give any of our listeners here, what would it be? And I'm wondering if it sort of sits within what we're talking about here, finding those passions and finding what helps you flourish and just making sure that we make the most of the time that we've got. Would it be something along those lines or something a little bit different?
But also, should we give him the option of nominating 5 things rather than just one?
Oh, no, I like it when it's down to one, because you have to choose something that really, really means something to you.
Yeah, now I feel like I want to guess.
And I've been thinking about this notion of freedom and how true that is of most people. And we were talking about this, and I shared the following. To me, freedom is not, it has very little to do with external conditions. To me, we all live in our own cage. I'm kind of like a bird, and I'm my own cage. The door is open. I'm free to fly out. But if you've been a bird in a cage, right, all you know is, that cage, and you don't fly out. Then I was thinking about this song that I heard recently. A goldfinch flies into an airport terminal, which is mostly glass, and it's flying around in this airport, but it doesn't realize it's not free. And I'm thinking, well, I think it's free because it doesn't realize it's doing what it was put here to do. And whether it's always going to be in some cage. And so it got me thinking, we are our own worst cage. And until we master ourselves and how we get in our own way, and this gets back to Stoic philosophy, the only thing we have control over is ourselves. So you have the key to your own freedom. And it's
I was about to ask, do you believe in free will?
It's you. I know the freest will we have is to free ourselves from our own chains and bonds. Because the mind is just an emotions. Oh my God, what have people through spiritual history talked about? What did the Buddha talk about? We have to free ourselves from our own thoughts.
That's a beautiful response, Corey.
I know, I absolutely love it. So freeing yourself by, probably understanding yourself and, getting to know yourself and then giving yourself permission to probably go for that and express that, I think is so beautiful.
And to be yourself and to be who you were meant to be.
Yeah. Absolutely adore that. And what I was hinting at earlier was obviously the 5 vitamins that you describe in your book as well, Towards Flourishing. But I think this is, a beautiful way to pinpoint it to one thing. It's absolutely amazing. Corey, it's been such an honor to have you on the show and chat with us. For me, it's really been a moment in my career. I can say that. So thank you so much for joining us, but also again and again for being so raw and open and honest. The world needs more of it. And I appreciate it every time I listen to you.
Thank you. Thank you both for having me.
No, not a trouble at all, Corey. And just to follow up on that sentiment there, I do remember the very first time that I ever come across your work, sitting in class and just reading the room. There was all these little aha moments going, oh, that's it. It now makes sense. So thank you for your contributions in the field. I dare say that it's going to continue to serve a great purpose, well beyond any of our time. I think the work that you've done with the is going to be greatly appreciated for many generations to come in helping shape our understanding of how we can be the best versions of ourselves. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks for all the great work that you do in this space, and we really appreciate the conversation.
Oh, you're welcome, and thank you.
Oh, wow. That was like a conversation and a half. My goodness, I don't even know where we start. I know that you're such a big fan of Corey's work.
I love his work. Like, I'm the biggest fan.
Yeah, I think that was maybe one of the things that we first bonded over when we first met and first had our very first Google Meet conversation. Yeah. The love of Corey's work and what he's done in this space and the contributions he's made to positive psychology. So I know for both of us this was a probably a bit of a heartfelt conversation to hear some of the struggles, but also how it inspired him to do the amazing work that he has done. And, still contributing to the field with his thoughts and ideas, which, was beautiful for us. I know that we were very fortunate to have his time for as long as what we did.
Absolutely, and it was a real pinch me moment for me. I can tell you that. I've been wanting to get to know him, or meet him for so long. I just have always missed an opportunity to catch up with him at one of the big positive psych conferences or anything like that. Absolutely. His contribution to the field of positive psychology research, I wonder if it's still so underappreciated in some way, because there's always certain names that fall in the field, but often it's not his, and it's like his name should be all over it.
Absolutely. It should definitely be up there. And I'm not going to mention the names because I think our listeners will know, many of those people that are mentioned very regularly in Pulse Psych. We don't want to give any extra airtime. Not to take away from their work.
Rightly so, they're mentioned all over, but he should be just as much represented amongst them.
Exactly. He should be sitting right up there alongside them with his contributions too.
Yeah.
So fascinating just hearing so much behind what informed his desire to want to get into this work, and right back from his childhood experiences through to the struggles that he had in the field, but also personal struggles as well. Hugely insightful just to hear what's happening behind the scenes, which is a big part of what we're trying to promote here with the podcast. There can often be a lot going on behind the scenes, right?
Yeah, 100%. And what's fascinated me from a very young age is how people deal with setbacks or tragedy or, whatever you want to call it, challenges or trauma in their lives and stuff like that. That he has experienced so much suffering from a young age, and yet he's carved this amazing career. I mean, he's very open and raw about his struggles even until now. So I don't want to downplay that whatsoever. And yet, despite all that, Hayes created this amazing career and just contribution to the field of positive psychology science and so forth. And he did actually say, at some stage in our chat, something to the extent of we are our own worst cage, and how we can be our own worst enemy. And the only thing we have control over is ourselves. We don't have control over what happens to us, but how we respond to that or react to that, that is within our circle of control. And it just reminded me of this beautiful little story or fable or metaphor or whatever about Buddha and the two arrows. Have you heard of it?
Oh, you're going to have to fill me in. I feel as though I know some aspects of the Buddhism story. I'm a big fan of Siddhartha and his work, but fill me in here.
Okay, so basically, look, there's a few different versions out there, and I'm going to tell you the version I know. Because I still love it the most. But if you Google, I don't know, I tried to, figure out, is this actually how the story went? And I can't really find it anymore. So I might be completely wrong, but I love it better than any of the other ones out there. So basically, this story is about Buddha, and it sort of explains the difference between pain and suffering. So the story goes something like Buddha was practicing archery one day. And so he's like in the forest or whatever, and he carefully takes aim at his target and then releases the arrow, but he misses. So he misses his target and then gets so frustrated by his failure that he just angrily grabs another arrow, and then in his rage he basically shoots himself in the foot. So this is the second arrow that he releases. And so, what the story is basically trying to tell is the first arrow was pain. Sometimes we miss a target. Sometimes, maybe the wind was blowing a bit harder than before or whatever. Some things are outside our own control, and sometimes shit just happens, right? But how we respond to that or react to that, big difference, obviously, that is within our circle of control. And often, if then we get enraged or we just jump at something, or we just scream or yell at someone or whatever that might be, that is then what creates suffering. So the whole idea being that pain times resistance, because our reactions often are a type of resistance to accepting the reality of what just happened. So the idea being that pain times resistance equals suffering. I don't know about you, but I think it is so spot on, and it explains so much.
Yeah, doesn't it just? And it is beautiful. A beautiful story, and I'm almost a little bit jealous that I haven't come across it until now, but every day's a day for learning.
Oh, you're welcome.
So thank you.
But you mentioned Siddhartha before, which is one of my all-time favorite stories too. What made you think of that?
Yeah, I just think that it's a beautiful origin story for religion, in that and we can take so much away from it. I think when I first learnt about Siddhartha, I was really inspired by often we think that we have so much, but sometimes we need to let go of what we do have to find and learn a little bit more about ourselves, and that was the beautiful journey that Siddhartha went on. And we probably don't have time to fully go into it now, but it is a beautiful story, and it actually goes back to some of my teachings. I was very fortunate to actually teach Buddhism in schools for a period of time.
Really?
And I loved it so much, and I think it was such a beautiful thing for so many of my students. But when they'd learnt about it for the first time, like I said, would love to go into it now, but we don't have that much time to go into it with all the passion. I know that when I speak about these topics I'm passionate about, we can tend to drag them out a little bit. It's a beautiful one. It really is a beautiful one. And I think one of the things that the both of us would have, and I'm guessing here, but I know it's something that we often speak about with thinking about Corey's conversation. It was his commitment to sort of his moral purpose and his values. Yeah. I don't know. Is that something that you sort of picked up on as well? I'm just guessing from what I know of you. I know that that's maybe something that we might have both taken away from this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he works very purpose-driven, doesn't he? And I know, 100%. I have to say, my brain is a little bit stuck on something called self-determination theory. I feel like this is such a mood killer right now, but for a good reason, because for me, again, one of the things that stood out was that whole idea of autonomy, where he says, this is what you've got control over, and you've got to find the things you've got control over. And it's so important that you find your way and do what is right for you. So the morals come in there as well. But whenever someone drops the word autonomy, my brain straight away, I'm so brainwashed, goes to self-determination theory. So for those people who are not familiar with that, it's a very, very famous psychological framework that basically talks about human motivation, how human motivation works. Not just human motivation, it sort of started out as a framework to try and explain how human motivation works, but it's also, there's a lot of research behind it, and a lot of that research also focuses on well-being. And basically what it posits is that motivation or well-being are driven by the satisfaction of three basic psychological needs we all have. So autonomy is one of them, and then there's competence and relatedness. So maybe just to briefly explain, competence is obviously, we're very motivated for a task if it's slightly challenging, so well adapted to our own level of competency, but also not too challenging that we just get demotivated, right? Because we're just overburdened by it, overwhelmed by it.
Appropriate level of stretch.
Exactly. And then relatedness is the whole idea of doing something together with someone else, for someone else, having that level of accountability, so somehow in connection with something or someone outside of ourselves, whether that's another person, a community, something like that. And then autonomy is how much you feel like you actually have a say over something. And so with those three levels, we can beautifully explain, if we have the data, sort of our level of motivation. So most people are aware of extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation, but there's actually, when it comes to extrinsic motivation, there's a few different levels of extrinsic motivation, one of which, so it's like a continuum, one of which is actually quite similar to intrinsic motivation. And the beauty is that if we use this insight for autonomy, competence, and relatedness, we can slide ourselves across this continuum to turn up our extrinsic motivation. And it's quite beautiful. And this is the last thing I'm going to say, because you mentioned values-driven and moral-driven and so forth. Our values and also our identity, and acting in line with that and finding ourselves goals that are in line with who we think we are, also play a crucial role in this.
Yeah, and doesn't it just and I have, had many conversations with clients, friends, colleagues around, they're thinking about the next career step or whether or not to take a new job. And, often I just bring it back to, the values and what drives our moral purpose and how do we want to be seen by others to a degree, right? Obviously our own perception of ourselves is really important as well, but it's like it's almost like, what's the legacy we want to leave? How do we want to be known? And I think about that all the time as well, and I know that in many conversations I've had with people, it's like, go towards the light that inspires and drives you to be the best person you can be, that helps you contribute most to society. And it's a beautiful reminder of what excites us should also, if we can find a way to make that into a job, that's awesome. Challenging to find at times, but really important to bring it back to that, I think.
Yeah. I have to be honest, Karen, when you just said go towards the light, I thought, you're throwing in the perfect segue to announce our next guest.
It might have been a little bit intentional. Probably very appropriate to give you a bit of an opportunity. It's become a bit of a theme in our episodes now to give a little bit of a hint as to what's to come. What hints have you got for our listeners around who our next guest is going to be?
Well, you just dropped the first one. Go towards the light. Or actually, don't go towards the light, because reminds me of the whole idea of memento mori. Remember, we all must die. Very, very, very big topic of our next guest. She's amazing. Yep. I am so fangirling just thinking of her. She's a big name. She is a best-selling author. Oh my gosh. Loved every page of her book. Her humor. I feel like her humor might be so underrated. She's so fucking funny. She has over 1 million views on her TEDx talk. It was when she gave it, it was one of the best performing TEDx talks of that year. What else can we say? Yeah. So Carpe Diem, I should say Carpe Diem, Memento Mori, they're the big topics of hers. Or she is an instructor at UPenn. Is this giving away too much?
I think we're on the cusp of giving away too much
delete,
now.
Rewind. Okay.
If our listeners do the research, they can be a little bit of ahead. That's fine.
She's amazing.
Yeah.
And I'm very excited about this.
Yeah, absolutely. Very exciting guest for us to have on the show. And I think that our listeners will love her approach to life and what she has to share in that episode as well. But hopefully for now, people got a lot out of this episode. As we mentioned at the very start of our little debrief here, this guest in Corey was someone who both of us really, really loved. And this was, as soon as we had a conversation around, do we want Corey on? Is this the right time? We're like, yes, absolutely. We want to learn more about his journey. We want to learn more about, this person that we've idolized in the field of positive psychology. So hopefully our listeners really enjoyed. Hopefully they stay tuned for our guest next week. But for now, we want to say big thanks for all your support. And we look forward to you joining us again in next week's episode.
Thank you for listening to today's show. We hope our conversation helped normalize the struggles so many of us face on the path to success. While on the outside things often look like sunshine and rainbows, this is rarely the experience for anyone behind the facade.
But instead of letting that demotivate you, we hope it does the exact opposite, to let it fuel you to keep pursuing your purpose and realise your potential. Just without the added burden of feeling inadequate, and a little more patience, some tips, and self-compassion instead. For further info, head to our website, flourishingunfiltered.com, and get in touch with us via our socials, @flourishingunfiltered.
Now, if you or someone you know is struggling with feelings of loneliness, low mental health, or suicidal thoughts, please know that there are people who care and treatments that can help. We've compiled some helplines for you in the show notes.
It's a wrap for Flourishing Unfiltered today. Please give us a follow and leave us a comment and a review. We hope you tune in next time.